Host Willa White, and this is my weekly podcast show that airs on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern on my Facebook page, Willa White Medium. It also goes out on the YouTube channel as well as the Lilydale Assembly Facebook page. And it's a wonderful weekly podcast that you can tune into live or watch the replay. And there are lots of archive videos of past shows that you can delight in. This is year 8 of episodes of Wednesdays with Willa. So I've had a lot of great guests and wonderful topics. You can educate yourself regarding spiritualism, mediumship, healing, faith, family, and more. And I want to announce that this is the third of a special series about the Fox family. And I have with me today the special guest, Tracy Murphy, caretaker and historian of the Fox property, also known as the Hydesville Memorial Park. Thanks for being here today, Tracy.
Thanks for having me again.
Yes, I love having Tracy on every year, especially because the birth of modern spiritualism is considered to be March 31st, which is fast approaching. And Tracy's been so generous to come on the show on a regular basis to talk about the Fox family. And especially she has an intimate connection with the history. She's always been fascinated with history, but the spiritualist history is very special. And in the mid 1800s is when this event took place. We're going to give you some history background about the Fox sisters and the Fox family. We have talked about Katie and Maggie Fox, and we've also talked about David Fox, the brother. That was the second of the series. And now we're going to be talking about Leah, who is the older sister of Katie and Maggie Fox, and really the managing force behind her two famous sister mediums, Kate and Maggie, as they jet-propelled spirit contact onto the world stage and gave rise to the birth of modern spiritualism. So this is going to be a great episode. I encourage you to look back at the other archive videos of this Fox Family series. All you have to do is be on my Facebook page or YouTube channel and type in Fox Family Series, and you will be able to educate yourself further about this and get the in-depth insight that Tracy is able to provide. So let's get started with some of this history, the background of the Fox family, because some people might be coming and watching this for the very first time and they've never even heard of the Fox family before. But this happened, and I will say Tracy has gone in depth with us. So if you want all the wonderful little details, please watch those videos. But just to give you a little background, in 1848, some happenings occurred in Hydesville, New York, which is located near Rochester, correct? Oh, Tracy, are you there? Well, we had her. Let's see. Maybe her connection is having an issue. Oh, I'll just real briefly, while things get set with her again, what I'll do is I'll tell you about some upcoming classes that I have as it relates to spiritualism. And one of the things that I have upcoming is a live event that is on March 24th. It's an evening event that is about Victorian spiritualism. So I'll be going in depth about all the famous mediums of Victorian times, all the best ones that I really like, and also the investigators, the psychic investigators about that. So that'll be a great evening. I'll also include, for people who attend the live class, metal bending, which is something that is really a lot of fun and sort of focuses the mind and directs it in a particular way. So please join me for that evening. You can register for that online, my website, willawhite.com. I also have some video learning series that are going on relating to spirit guides and also chakras. So you can check that out on my website. And I do have mediumship development circles that I do. And the next round starts on April 7th. So go ahead and reserve your spot now for that. And it looks like we've got Tracy back. So yay, tech things happen.
I'm not even at the property and I'm getting booted.
Well, I'm glad you're back with us to share about the Fox family and just let's give them a little 5-minute nugget, if that, about some of the history regarding the Fox sisters,
Sure.
before we launch into Leah and her big role.
Okay, so most people know the Fox sisters as Kate and Maggie Fox, and they were living in Hydesville with their parents. I think sometimes a lot of people are under the assumption that they were there for a very long time, and it was a very short period. They had moved in around December 1847, right smack in the middle of winter. And they probably, I think by April or May, they were living with their sister, Leah, in Rochester. But, Mrs. Fox was the first one to walk into the cottage, and she said, "This place is haunted." And for her to say that was, very strange, because you didn't talk about things like that. And it wasn't very long after, they had moved in, that they started hearing these rapping noises that they just could not explain. And they pretty much came up with every excuse. Mrs. Fox thought that, oh, maybe it was a shoemaker who was, cobbling shoes in the middle of the night, because it was so quiet, and the weather was so cold that you could hear for miles away. Mr. Fox would think that someone was knocking on the windows and the doors, but he would go and check them, and of course, no one was there. And then, we bring ourselves up to the evening of March 31st, and that's the first time that we're aware of that the girls actually reached out. And their mother had basically said to them, "This is it. We're not entertaining this noise anymore. We don't know what it is. Like, it's just got to stop." And it was the girls that reached out, and they heard the rapping noises, and basically, Katie yelled out, "Do as I do," and she clapped her hands 4 times, and the rappings made the same amount of noise that she did. And then we have Maggie, who yells out, "Do as I do," and basically claps her hands 3 times but doesn't make a sound. And what she heard was the 3 sounds imitating her, and she yelled out, "Oh, look, mother, they can see as well as hear." And from there, it just snowballed to what we knew as modern spiritualism.
And it started a big wave in the local area, the local community. They swarmed into that house. They wanted to investigate it thoroughly. The Fox family had to endure a lot of scrutiny through that process. And it was a really uncomfortable time for many of the family members. They weren't really going for celebrity. They weren't going for fame. And they just wanted to go about the business. But because it took it by storm, it started to hit the newspapers and started to spread, and news of it, even though there had been other spirit occurrences around the world. I mean, in many ways, spirit contact is ancient, and there were other mediums of the time that were also having phenomenon happen around them. This one somehow really caught people's attention. 2 young girls, and there was such an interest in this, and also wanting to see whether there was fraud. So a lot of the psychic investigators were quite rough with the girls, which we talked about in past episodes. But as it relates to the family, David Fox, and in that second of the Fox family series, he was such a steady hand and such a kind brother, and lived not far from them. So I encourage you all to, look back at that video, and I really appreciate David's demeanor and how he was able to really help through that time, despite again, scrutiny that came at him from local community members, but he was well respected.
Mm-hmm.
And we move into Leah. Leah was an older sister because there had been a big age gap, shall we say, between Leah and Katie and Maggie Fox. It's as if the Mr. and Mrs. Fox had two broods, shall we say, right?
Yeah, pretty much, yes. Yep.
And so Leah was the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the age gap between Leah and Katie and Maggie?
I think between Leah and Maggie, it probably would have been about 20 years. She was very much a mother figure to them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they, obviously she was their older sister. She was born in 1814. So for them, she wouldn't have been in the house. She was always the older sister, more matronly like their mother. But they also didn't see her as much growing up because she had her own family.
Mm-hmm.
So for them, if she got involved, it was serious. Something was going to happen. And that's basically what happened after, the wrappings and communicating with the peddler. Nobody reached out to her and said, hey, we need you to come. She was actually living in Rochester with her daughter. Leah married very young. She was 14 when she married. Yeah. And she had a daughter. And I was actually thinking about this the other day because she never had any other children. And, and I was just like, I wonder why she never had children. But then I thought to myself, well, gosh, if I was 14 and I had, or 15 and had a baby, I might not ever have children again. Like that must have been so traumatic. I mean, that's just me assuming, but it feels like it would have been a very traumatic situation given her age and, the situation she was in our medical field back then, so it does make me wonder, like, yeah, I
Well, she might not have been able to have any more children.
That was another thing
because
too.
Again, that happens to women. Even back then, it was such a thing that it was enough on their body in that one occasion. Yeah.
So, because now we're like, oh my gosh, 14, that's horrible.
So
back then it was like, that's kind of normal. But
so how old was her daughter when this happened?
So her daughter was about 11 or 12. She was pretty much the same age as Katie. She was in between Maggie and Katie.
Because if she was born 1814, and let's say the child, did she have a child right away, or there were a few years without?
I think it was a year. Yeah, and then he abandoned her. They say he abandoned her.
The husband.
Yes.
Well, there is another good reason why she didn't have any more kids.
Right?
There we go. We found it, folks.
Yeah, there you go.
So let's say that was like 1830 that she finally had a child, or maybe 1832, something like in there must be.
Right.
But then, so her husband has left her. She's in Rochester, New York. She stays there. Mm-hmm. What is she doing? How is she supporting herself at that point?
So she pretty much established herself very early on. Those firstborns, they have that role to fulfill. So she was very self-sufficient. A lot of people saw her as this stern woman who just got the job done. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. We are going to survive, and this is how we're going to do it. So she was very musically trained. She had taken lessons. She could play the piano. They say she had a beautiful voice. She was trained. And so that's how she was making her ends meet, was basically by giving piano lessons to students and singing lessons. And, being in Rochester, and she was just in the right location, she had a lot of clients, and that's how she did it. But, she's living up in Rochester, and all of a sudden she's walking down the sidewalk, and this was like mid-April. And a man approached her that she knew, and he said, "Oh, I was reading in the newspaper. Aren't you John Fox's daughter?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "Wow, there's a lot of stuff going on down in Hydesville." And he gave her the newspaper, and she just had no idea. And so basically from there, she went home and she grabbed a few of her closest friends and her daughter and got on a packet boat and came to Newark. She wasn't messing around.
No, I always envision Leah as like a boss cow. Like she's very like, I'm going to horn in here. I'm going to make sure that I'm part of this and that it's going as it should. And really that kind of woman that is quite fierce.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I know. I try to think of someone I could compare her to, but I can't. She was her own force. And when you look at some of her photos, she's very stoic, I guess would be a good word for her, because you hardly ever see, there's no grimace or anything. It's just
in every photo. So the photo that I used to advertise for this particular podcast episode is the three of the sisters together. And we have, Katie, Maggie, and Leah in that photo. And there were other photos that were taken of Katie and Maggie, the girls as well, we'll refer to them. But Leah is part of that. She's a central figure for this. She always kind of, I feel, put herself front and center because she probably was one of those people who thinks 100 miles an hour and everybody else is putting along at 2. And I always think of her as like road raging a little bit is how I would put that to you. It's kind of funny to think of. Oh, it looks like we may have lost her again, but there you are. You're not frozen. You were frozen for just a second. In terms of her background, the musically inclined, and then teaching and being in that mode, when you say that she just kind of dropped all of that, got on the packet boat with her daughter and her friends, what do you mean by her friends?
So back in the 1800s, it was pretty customary that women never traveled alone.
Correct.
So you always had like an entourage, or chaperones as they were called. And she took, I believe it was 2 of her friends with her on the boat. And they came all the way from Rochester. They made it down into Newark. And from there, she went to David's house because that's where everybody was. And so her friends stayed in the village, but she took a coach out to David's house. And the driver knew exactly, without even asking, where she was going. And he basically said, "Did you want to go to the spook house?" And she was, she was kind of offended, like, "No, I'm going to see my parents. That's so ridiculous." And so they passed the house going to David. And then once she got up there, it was chaos. Like, the girls were really excited to see her. And there's that moment where, for Maggie, it's like, oh, she's here. Like, my sister is here, because she had that effect. She was the boss. She was the boss lady. Like, she was going to take care of this.
Because Mrs. Fox, the mother, was, beside herself with things. Yeah. David had the brother had moved them to his house because you can't. Everybody's swarming.
Right.
The place where the Fox family had been, and it's my understanding that the Mr. Fox, the father, he stayed at the house trying to defend the property, make sure people weren't trying to enter it without his say so, because he'd been trying to build a house somewhere else, right? And they were
He did,
renting this
yeah.
one. This is a renter. It's a rental house that they're in. So Leah arrives, and probably immediately tries to assess the situation and go into that instead of being in a faint or a swoon.
Right. Yes. She just like immediately steps in. She's the boss. And I think like for them, there was some sort of a comfort in, oh my gosh, somebody else is going to take care of this for us. And that's basically what she did. Just not in the way I think they wanted. She looked at her mother, and by this time, they say Mrs. Fox's hair turned white almost overnight. She was frail, she was ill. They portray her in a very like, oh, this poor woman has taken on this affliction, and where David is like, oh, we'll figure it out. It'll take some time, but we're going to figure it out. And then Leah steps in and says, all right, let's get to the bottom of this. So they stay up there. She stays for a few days and basically says, come on, let's eat some dinner. Let's go to church. Let's do the things we need to do. And, her voice was comforting to them. And so she would sing hymns and, just make them feel better. And, after being there for about a week or so, she decided that she was going to go to the house and see for herself what these guys have been telling her. And, apparently when she got there, that's when she realized that, maybe I have some spiritual gifts. She went down there. There were men digging in the cellar. There were, like you said, her father's down there defending the property because he's just hoping life is going to be normal and keep going because, I got things to do. I got a house to build. But when she walked in and she did hear the rappings, I don't think anybody ever denied that, but it was almost like a switch flipped for her where she was like, I think I've got something here. And, she had noticed also that when Maggie and Kate were together, the raps were louder, more pronounced. And she basically said to her mother, why don't you let me take Katie and I'll take her back to Rochester and we'll see if we can stop this. Which, to me, that sounds like a really great idea. So if the girls are, messing around, we're going to put an end to this. So basically, she takes Katie and, and her entourage, and they go back to Rochester. And, the whole way there, they are reporting hearing these rapping noises. And it's interesting because now Kate doesn't have Maggie, but she's got Leah's daughter, Lizzie. And it's kind of, you get two little girls that are giggly and, and she's kind of like, no, stop, stop it. And she heard the noises. Everybody heard the rapping noises, but she was basically like, nope, we're ignoring it. But once they got into her house, it was hard to ignore because the noises were up there. They followed with Katie. As we know, they followed them. But she had Katie for a couple months, getting reports back from, Margaret and seeing how Maggie was doing. And same thing, it's going on at David's house. It isn't getting any better. It's not any less. They're fighting off the people down there. And for Leah, it's getting more interesting because now this is affecting her livelihood to the point where she's losing all of her students for music and the neighbors are complaining. She actually makes the decision to move. Some of her closest friends, which were Amy and Isaac Post, they were Quaker friends, they decide to help them out. And, he kind of gets involved too, where he says, like, let's bring some people in and see if we can recreate this. And I think that's really how the circles and the seances started.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, her friends making suggestions. And from there, it just kind of snowballs. She ends up, sending word to Margaret that, hey, you might as well come and bring Maggie with you because it's happening. And, once Maggie gets up there, I think Leah saw, look what we can do.
So were there letters? Are there letters that detail this, or what is the source of information?
There are some letters. There's a lot of family letters. Unfortunately, a lot of them are either in museums or like the family collection.
Mm-hmm.
There is a really good book. I don't know if it's in print anymore, but it's it's the story of the Fox family. And it's written by a family member that married into the family, actually married one of David's sons. And it's very detailed, and they talk about the trials. Also, you have Leah, who wrote her book, The Death Blow to Spiritualism, which really wasn't, but in her mind it was.
So the titles of the title of the one book written by the one who
Miriam Pond Buckner.
So Miriam, and then you said Pond
Buckner.
Buckner, Buckner kind of thing. Okay. All right. And then do you remember the title of that book?
The title is The Story of the Unfortunate Fox Family. I know, right? Yeah.
Which is so funny because
unfortunate, but I think it's because of everything that they went through. Like, it wasn't this happy, like we have all these reality shows and people are famous and they're making money and everybody's wooing over them. And it wasn't that way. It really wasn't. And it was very unfortunate. It's kind of like, oh, you kind of picked the wrong family because they didn't want the fame.
Right.
So, it's really difficult sometimes for me because people are always like, oh, the Fox sisters. And it's like, but you have to understand where they came from. It wasn't grand. It wasn't, it's kind of like maybe the Pope sees his calling and, his job as, is it some sort of a burden? Yeah, it's a wonderful, treasure. It's a great, stature, but you're very limited in what you can do. And that was the way it was for all of them. Once they got into that box, oh, you're a medium? Oh, great. And I think a lot of mediums feel this way today, like unless you know your circle. You go out in public and somebody's like, oh, she's a medium. And next thing you know, they're like, oh, is anybody behind me? Can you tell me about my grandma? It's like, you just want to be you.
Yes.
You just want to be you. And unfortunately for the girls, it started so young that I don't think they ever knew who they could have been.
And remind people how old Katie and Maggie were at that point.
They were 9 and 11.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, 9 and 11, and they're having this deluge of people around them and all of this flurry. Now, some people would say, oh, well, some folks would really like that. But a true sensitive, that's the last thing they want.
Right. So, and that's, a lot of people always kind of shy away from the alcoholism part of the story, where I bring it up because one, it's truth, it's factual. They both were alcoholics. But if you constantly hear voices or you're seeing things or people are wanting things, one of the ways that you shut things out or drown things out is to self-medicate. That's how it is. It's no different today than it was back then.
So just so I make sure everybody understands the story of the unfortunate Fox family by Marion Pond Buckner.
Mm-hmm.
And then also Leah Fox wrote a book, and hers is
Yes.
titled
The Death Blow to
The
Spiritualism.
Death Blow to Spiritualism.
Mm-hmm.
So those are good sources for people if they want to read more, want to research more about the Fox family, and from the perspective of autobiographical, right, on Leah's account. And I just want to take us back there for a little bit. In this story, after they've moved in with Leah, both of the girls are now in Rochester. They are fully under Leah's wing at that point. And it's my understanding they don't return back under, into their regular family with their mother and father. That from then on out, it's Leah and the other adventures that happen. Now, at that point, because Leah has been sensing spirit too, she's got them in Rochester at her home. And at what point do things start to really amp up in the Rochester area for her and the girls?
I would say within a year, by probably in 1848, it would be probably around July where things start really picking up, where maybe that, everybody's noticing a little bit more, words getting out. There's people that are coming to the house. At first it was just Leah's, closest friends, and they were coming to what they called investigate, which basically meant they were sitting down at the table with the girls and holding seances or circles, as they called them. But then it just, they get tipped. Maybe somebody leaves $5. And I think it's at that point where Leah says, oh, well, maybe we could, make some money out of this. Maybe we can actually make a living out of this. And I think from there, that's when, she had to move to a bigger house to accommodate everyone. And, they move over to Troop Street, and they have a dedicated parlor that they use for all of their, circles and seances. But she steps into the role of, I'm your manager now. This is the way it's going to be. And, you're going to work from 9 in the morning until 1 p.m., take a break for lunch, and then you're going to go back to work until 9 p.m. at night. But we'll take Sundays off because we're going to go to church. So it was very regimented for her. And, when the girls didn't want to participate, she would do it. She would go out to her friends and sit at circles and would call in spirits.
That's an intense schedule for children. I mean, they're tweens at that point.
Absolutely.
Very, very intense schedule for anyone, especially the energetic demands of being a medium.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, not being able to just be them for a while.
Right. Go in the garden and play.
People did have to hit the ground running faster than they do nowadays. People are not expected at the age of 9 and 11 to be running a business. Right. So Leah is probably thinking, hey, I've lost pretty much everybody who I was teaching music to and singing to. And she's already, probably been teaching people stage presence and how to have a persona. And she knows some of the people in that show business world, I imagine. Right. Yep. And so she's seeing this as an opportunity, but also I always visualize that she's like, I want everybody to know that this is real. You've put my family through things.
Yes.
We've kind of got to run with it and and show that there's proof of spirit contact, not just with the peddler, but with other people's loved ones, because that, I'm sure, became the demand. Well, if you can talk to so-and-so, can you talk to my person? And so, what a perfect storm.
Absolutely. And I think she was in a tough spot. And I don't want people to think that she didn't like care about her sisters, because she did. And her and David had a very close relationship. And she was the oldest of the first four, and he was the youngest. So, there was 6 years between them, but she did care for them, but it was a different relationship with the younger girls, because she was seen as someone who was going to take care of a problem. And if she was called, there was a problem. It wasn't just like, oh, Leah is visiting, yay. There was a problem that she needed to come and take care of. So,
and this is her way of doing it.
Right. And if this is her way of doing it, then we have to follow along. And so I think, her intentions in the beginning were, okay, we can make some money from this. I've got to put a roof over these kids' head. If they're living with me, my mom's now living with me, then I have to provide for all of these people. And she did.
And she didn't have a husband. She didn't have any of that kind of backing, because they ever officially divorced, or was it just a separation?
Basically, they say that he abandoned her and then he moved out west where he remarried. The laws were a lot different back then.
So it didn't count as bigamy, I guess.
Yes, right? Like maybe they declared him dead after a while, or it was abandoned. She was definitely abandoned. But and she did marry after. She married 3 other times after this.
That's important to know.
Yeah.
And so did she married, when you say 3 more times after this, do you mean after the Fox sisters event?
Yes. So her first marriage was to a man, his last name was Fish. So she was known as Leah Fox Fish. And then she married, I know, it's terrible. She married another man by the name of Kelvin Brown. And he lived, he was a very close friend of the family. Her mother looked at him like he was a foster son. And I don't understand it, whatever, but he was on his deathbed, and he must have loved her, and he wanted to marry her. And I don't know, maybe he had money and he wanted to make sure that it went to a family. Because she agreed to marry him. So they were married, and he lived for 3 years after, until he passed. And then her final husband was Daniel Underhill. So, and he was, I guess, the love of her life. He doted on her. Absolutely doted on her.
And how long were they married then?
They were married for quite a while. I would say probably the last 20 some years of her life, if not more. He came to her defense. He was at a sitting and she was doing a reading, and she was having sparks coming off of her fingers, as they described in the seance. And it was so intense that she had to go outside. And she put her hands in snow. And then the next day, he was just so impressed. He just thought she was, the bee's knees there. And the next day, I guess people were outside walking around the house, and they saw sulfur in the snow. So they accused her of trickery. And he to her defense and said, "Are you kidding me? She is not tricking anybody. This is what she does. And don't you know who she is and her family?" And I think from there, she was like, "Oh, he likes me." Because shortly after that, they were married, and he just doted on her. They had a beautiful apartment in New York City. He built an atrium and filled it with songbirds for her. Yeah. So, and I think he basically like let her do her thing, which was good. But he did ask her to step back. He didn't want her being ridiculed. So he did say, I really don't want you doing these circles or giving messages anymore. Leave that to your sisters because this is too much for you. So, again, back into the role of manager.
So in terms of this, just to backtrack it a little bit, because I think it's great that she had that role, that you detailed the romances of Leah Fox.
Sure.
But I just want to take us back a little bit in time to, she's got the girls there. She decides to open up for the seances. At what point, as the manager of her sisters, Katie and Maggie, does she decide that it's okay for the psychic investigators to come in?
I think that was done on the opinions and the insistence of the Post family. Because
so Isaac Post's family.
Yeah, I think at that point he was like, listen, if you really want to present this and you want to be legitimate, you got to let these guys check you out. But it wasn't so much checking her out, it was the girls. And that's basically when, they were like, oh, let's rent out Corinthian Hall. The actual one of the messages that she received was rent Corinthian Hall. And so they did. And they brought in these investigators. It was, I'm not sure how many, but they were men of science. So you had doctors and philosophers and scientists. But, I hope she didn't realize what they were going to do, as far as like stripping these girls down and, holding their joints to make sure.
How do you let that be okay, that you've exposed your sisters to that?
Yeah. And, I
always bothered me.
Right. And I wonder if, it's kind of like the snowball effect. It gets to be so big that you can't stop it. And I think maybe that was part of it. Maybe it had gotten so big that, she was like, oh my gosh, I can't stop this now. I'm trying to, I want everybody to know this is legit. And so, it happened.
And so remind us, what ages were Katie and Maggie at that point with Corinthian Hall, would you say?
They probably would have been about 10 and 12. It wasn't shortly after they were up there that they were still young enough to not have that happen. But, just that was how, if you're going to crack a joint, we're going to make sure you're legit, I guess. And that's basically what we did.
In Corinthian Hall, just for people to understand, that's where people would have musical events, where they would have shows and the big things.
It was the place to be.
And so it wasn't just a matter of the scientists there. There were other people invited as like an audience.
There was an audience. Yep. Yeah.
Talk about voyeurism. Yeah. With all.
Yeah. And, it's that double-edged sword. So, people are showing up and they're thinking, oh, one, we're either in for a great show, or two, this is it. They're going to prove this is it. And I think for the girls, it was kind of a turning point for them, because it's, they must have been thinking like, my gosh, when is this ever going to end? When are they just going to believe us and let us do our thing? Because all this is going on with the public, but internally they're still hearing the rappings, they're still communicating, and it's not stopping. It's just nonstop. And you've got not one spirit, but thousands that are rushing you, lined up behind you, saying, listen to me.
Yeah. You got to set those healthy boundaries. those mediums out there.
Right.
Set your healthy boundaries, because that certainly is not just, you may want to feel like the feeling of being special or helping people, but this is a very unhealthy way to go about it.
Yeah. And who was there to mentor them? This was all uncharted territory. So, it just kind of, nobody was there to say, listen, you can say no, which they did. They tried to say no. They tried to ignore it. And, the spirits were like, okay, fine, we'll leave you alone. And it stopped. There was no noises, no rapping, no nothing. And for them, it was painful, because all of a sudden it was kind of like having your best friend be with you every single day, and then they go home and you miss it. And it's kind of like, where are they? Like, oh.
Because they weren't able to develop friendships with people their own age at that point.
Yeah.
Or anybody beyond. With that tight schedule that you mentioned earlier that Leah had them in, of seances.
Yeah. She had them under, it was, okay, we're going to fix the problem. And this is how we're doing it.
So they undergo not just Corinthian Hall, but other investigations at that point. Leah's there watching this unfold for her sisters. So let's move us forward a little bit. So they're giving seances, they're doing this. And then around what age do things start to kind of shift?
I think about, I'm going to say by the time Maggie was 16, they were already in New York City.
Yes.
And I think that's where it shifts, because that's where she falls in love.
Yes.
And she, of the two girls, she was very, I really don't want to do this. And if there's an alternative for me, then I'm going to find it. And I think with Maggie, that was her thing. Like, oh, yeah, I'll sit. I'll do this because you've asked me to do it. But I think once Elijah Kane comes into the picture, she's done. And with him whispering in her ear, like, oh, you shouldn't be doing this. You should be living the life of a young girl, and you should be going to school, and, and, oh, I really love you, and, I want better. And I think that got into her head. So then, she's like, I really don't want to do this.
I mean, he's a handsome celebrity adventurer, explorer,
right,
well-respected person. And so she's going to be like, yeah, you're my secret line, and I'm in love. And does it get covered in any of the materials how Leah was handling? Here she's got this 16-year-old sister, teenager. How is Leah handling that?
So Leah handles it by focusing her attention now on Katie. And Katie being the younger and, not goofy, but, just a silly little girl, who is more into the messages and, and really fine tuning her gift. She just kind of goes right with Leah, and Leah's like, okay, come on. They had 2 apartments in New York City, one for Leah and her daughter, and then Mrs. Fox and the girls. And I think that it was basically Leah saying, all right, Katie, come on. If Maggie doesn't want to play, then we're going to go. That little sibling rivalry thing. But I think that's kind of where you see that divide with Maggie and Kate, even though they were locked in tight. They were, tight. I don't even know how to explain it. They were very, very, very close. They could have been twins. I think, the communication between the two of them. But Leah always seemed to be the thorn between the roses. And no matter what she did, I mean, she was prickly. That was her demeanor. But I think from there, I think she knew she could win the battle with Katie, but not so much Maggie.
Yeah. Well, she probably got to that point of recognition. Well, she is older. She's ready to enter into the marriageable zone.
Yes.
At that point.
Yeah.
And young love.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Right.
And so now Leah is at that point, is she still doing seances herself, or is she stepped back, or
she definitely stepped back.
At that point.
She took on more of that manager role where she's saying, yes, this is so-and-so is meeting you tonight. This is the circle we're doing. Very, very controlled situations. Or we're going over to so-and-so's house to do a session. That's pretty much it. Once she married Daniel, he pretty much.
So he was from New York City then, Underhill. Yeah. Mr. Underhill there was from New York City, and that's one of the reasons why they moved to New York City. And
that it was a bigger, Rochester was getting small. And I think they kind of felt like maybe they had, they'd already done the circuit. We'd been around, there's really no new people coming in, but the big city.
Yeah. So they weren't trying to travel beyond, they pretty much.
They did for a little while. They did what I call the world tour. They went to Toronto. They went to the big cities. They were in Ohio for a while. They went to Pennsylvania. They were in Philadelphia, but I think New York City was kind of home base, because they would go back and see David every once in a while. And Mr. Fox, who's the poor man, by this time the house is done and he is furious with his wife because my life is back here, lady. you're up there. Not happy with you. I'm just a blacksmith. He didn't want any of this. He didn't. Yeah. He was so upset. And, here he is back in Hydesville living in his house, and his family is in New York City. And he does come up. He comes and stays, a month at a time or whatever, when requested. But I don't think he had a very close relationship with his children. At least Maggie and Kate, because they were pretty much taken, and swept into this life that he didn't want a part of.
So at that point, because Maggie has fallen in love, she's 16, she's on a different part of her journey. She's still attending some seances, but really kind of starting to cool it. Katie is still running with it. Leah still managing her, getting her connected, probably with other spiritualists and other performance places.
Yep.
Because there's such a fine line back then about those things.
Very much.
And at that point, there hadn't been a real establishment of a lot of spiritualist churches either, or centers, or Lilydale didn't exist at that point either. So, they were in New York City, and she's married to Mr. Underhill. So the love of her life, as you said. So then what happens?
So, by the time they're in New York City, Leah's daughter is now growing up and looking for a family of her own. I've never really read anything or found where she actually branches off and gets her own life. I think she always stays pretty close with her mother. But I find it interesting that as Katie gets older, and of course she, goes on and lives her own life, and Maggie is now living her own life. It seems to me that Leah starts to focus in on David's children, mostly his daughter. His daughter's name is Leah, after Leah, and she starts bringing her into the fold. Not so much as spiritualist, but just I can provide her with a better education. I can provide her with language and science and all of these wonderful things that you guys can't give her back in Hydesville. And it's interesting because she not only does it with Leah, but she does it with other people's children. And, which makes me really wonder, if something did traumatic happen to her where she was not ever able to have children.
Right.
After Lizzie. So I think, for her, it's just repetitive that she calls up David and says, hey, give me Leah. And, Leah goes and lives with her and takes her from this little country girl to this city girl who's wearing fancy dresses and gets her hair done all the time. And now you're going to sit and have a French lesson. And, to the point where after a while it gets old. And, and she's basically like writing letters to her parents saying, please bring me home. Like, this woman is crazy. I don't know if she said that, but she was basically like, bring me home. I don't want this life.
I don't want this life. I don't fit in here.
Yeah, and I think for Leah, in her head, it was like, oh, it's another, she's another Lizzie and I can mold her. And, and it's just kind of sad. And, and then she does have this horrible rift with Maggie and Kate. And, and Kate comes back to stay with Maggie, after her husband passes. And, Maggie's not in a very good state because Cain has died, and in a horrific way that, she never anticipated. It's just, she basically tells Kate, I want your kids. Come live with me. I can offer them a better life than you can. And it's almost like the money went to her head, like, I'm more refined and I can give them things that you can't. And, they're not destitute yet, but they're not they're making it. They have a roof over their head. They have food. They're doing the best they can. But for Leah, she's just like, I can do so much better. And that was the big conflict. That is why they broke off from her and basically said, enough is enough.
Yeah.
We've had it with you. You're not, we're grown women. You are not controlling our lives anymore. And, I think that was the defining point. And it was Leah. She went to the police and she said, listen, these women, they don't know what they're doing. These poor kids are being abused. My sisters are alcoholics. Like, they need to be taken away, and I'm willing to take them in. And for her, for Kate, she was like, I'm done. This is it. Like, now I see what Maggie's been saying. And that was the big rift. And they didn't speak to her after that. Once those charges were, thrown out there, and the police had to come and they did the investigation, and child services came and, and they said, no, the boys are fine. And, living conditions aren't great, but they're going to school. They're doing everything that needs to be done. And I think that was her last ditch effort to hold that control over her sisters, because after that, it was, we're done. If we're going to do this, we're doing it on our own, and you are not involved. So.
And I'm sure she thought she was absolutely right, that she could provide better. And they, they weren't doing everything right with alcoholism and other issues like that. So, I mean, some of her concerns were valid, but it does sound like that she knew how to embellish to get her way about things. And, how sad for that whole family. I mean, the title of the book is correct. The story of the unfortunate Fox family. That is very, very correct. And, sadly, some people, their families are quite dysfunctional in these capacities. And there's Leah with her money and her savior complex.
Right. Yeah. And you've got these
control, power,
mentality of the world, and doing the best they can with some really harsh circumstances. Maggie never gets over the death of Elijah, ever. And it's just devastating. And I think she's hard to be around because it's a very negative vibe that she gives off, because she's heartbroken. Like, she never ever gets over it. And you've got Kate, who is super, super close to her, trying to make things better. And then you've got Leah, who always swoops in to save the day and fix the problem. And I think she looked at Maggie and was like, I can't fix this.
Yeah.
You know, so I think there comes a point where she actually just gives up on Maggie, but then kind of focuses in because she's like, oh, look, she's got children, but her husband just died. And, ooh, what can I do? And I don't necessarily think that she meant to be like, I'm going to kidnap your children because I'm so much better than you. You know, I think in her head, she really thought she was doing them a favor.
That she could like take the child. If she said, I'll take the child temporarily is one thing versus permanently.
Yeah.
And obviously this is a pattern. This is a pattern for Leah. You've well established this for all of us that she continually does this throughout the years.
Yep.
And if ever there was a person who needed to put their energy toward maybe a group, that a charitable group or endeavor in that regard.
There's an orphanage.
Yeah, don't use it on your nearest to dearest. They're probably not going to thank you for it.
Yeah. It just, and it, you know, I when you look back at some of the other siblings, you know, Maria, for instance, you know, her children, everybody kind of knew, sort of, like, she names them, but Elizabeth, nothing. You don't know any. She wants no one to know. It ends with her. So you don't know who her children are or their children. And, you know, she didn't want to be associated with the Fox name.
Wow.
She didn't want anybody to know. So, you know, it's kind of sad that, you know, it makes you wonder, like, was Leah over there going, oh, come on, bring him to the city? And, you know, what was she, you know, what did she try to do anything, if anything? I don't know. It's the whole family dynamic it's so interesting, and it's so sad in some parts. And, you know, 200 years ago, we really had not a lot has changed. You know, you've got those family members that are like, oh, I can raise your kid better than you can. You know, it's a different world.
I think there is a different world, but it also, that's the human dynamic and families trying to figure out how to be families.
Right.
And it is a cautionary tale for people who are sensitives, to be very vigilant about these things, because there could be a hypersensitivity that erupts. People are raw. They're dealing with things that they feel very, very overwhelmed with. And what also saddens me for the entire family is that as close as they were with spirit communication, they didn't really know how to seek peace within themselves. So there's a missing component for them, that when it comes to spiritual development, nowadays, mediums are able to really focus in on their spiritual unfoldment that goes along hand in hand with the development of their skills, so that they don't have to be so far off base with their own energetic system.
Crazy. Yeah.
So we don't want people going woo woo. This is a cautionary tale, everybody. Don't go woo woo. Don't go into these high amplified aggressive stances. It's really important that we find balanced mind and work toward that as a goal. And, you know, this is a family that definitely experienced various toxicities externally and internally, with alcoholism from Mr. Fox that he did overcome.
Yes, he did.
And the alcoholism being strong in their family with Katie and Maggie. And I just feel like it's good if people recognize that sometimes with great gifts come great difficulties. And the more people, you know, rest on God and really have that connection with their source, that infinite intelligence, that's what's going to help to gear and steer them appropriately. So to get this concluded then, because I know our time's gone so fast, as always, But so there's the rift, and now Leah, at what age is she? Did she pass then? Do you know actually what?
I think she was in her 60s.
In her
The girls
60s.
were very young.
Did she have health difficulties then? Do you know if they were by any chance, or was that ever?
I think she just, if she did have any health difficulties, I haven't seen it. Basically, she's just living her life now. Settled into her golden years, and
With Mr. Underhill. Does he fast before her or after her? Do you know?
I am not sure. I almost want to say she passes before him. He's the one that actually opens up one of his plots for the girls in a family plot. Yeah, for the girls. Because they died within a year of each other. I think they were 92 and 93. So years, not ages. They were young. They were very young. They were in their 50s. So
right. So
that was probably ancient anyway. So.
So it's beautiful that he did try to see the family through those things, and probably do his affection for his wife. But I'm sure he had his own affection for the girls. He probably got to know them as well, and wanted to assist and help. He seems like a good-hearted guy.
I think he was. Yeah, I think. I mean, anybody who goes to great lengths to build an atrium for their wife because she loves songbirds. I mean, I'd be happy with a porch swing.
Exactly. So, any last things you'd like to share with us about Leah?
Oh, Leah is difficult for me because she isn't my favorite, and and sometimes I feel like people feel that when I talk about it, because I always roll my eyes.
The same way.
Right? Like, it's not a secret. Katie was my favorite. But I think at the end of the day, in her head, she thought she was doing the right thing. And who's to say that without her guidance, where they could have gone? I mean, she really did. She was very stern in picking certain scenarios which may have benefited them. Who knows where this could have gone. If it had been left to Margaret, maybe they never would have gotten out of Rochester. If it had been left to Maggie, they never would have gone anywhere, probably, and with Katie being so young, it could have gone crazy, or crazier. So I think, for all the little weird things that Leah did and her quirks, she really, I think at the end of the day, had their best interest at heart. And she just did things her own way. It was her way or the highway or the canal way. I don't know, but
canal.
So while it's, I'm like, oh yeah, I am grateful for her because she is part of the story. They all are part of the story, and I don't think we would have a story if it wasn't for her.
That's very, very true. And I'm glad that it took some of the heat off of David, and that he was able to somehow get on with his life because of the removal of the children from that space. And they weren't without their mother per se, but I feel like Leah really took on that role of manager mother and probably overrode her constantly.
I'm sure she did. I'm sure. And who's to say that Mrs. Fox wasn't like, oh, thank God somebody else is going to take over? Because, I mean, after having all these children, and, it's like the last two are the most troublesome, and then not by their own fault. So for Leah stepping in, she was probably like, oh, great. I'm thankful they're yours.
They're yours. Well, we really appreciate you coming on the show today to share about Leah Fox and to be part of this Fox Family series. It's really great to be able to educate people and get a bit more in depth about these various characters. I call them characters.
Well, they are.
It's like some sort of drama, movie drama that maybe someday they'll do a movie of it all. In case people are wanting to know how to get a hold of you, because as I did mention, Tracy Murphy is the caretaker and historian of the Fox Sister property, also known as the Hydesville Memorial Park. You have an off season and a season. And, how about we clarify for folks how they can get a hold of you and when they can be at that property?
Sure. So the property, we are open starting March 31st. And I usually open the property by doing, the celebration of modern spiritualism. This year it'll be on the 30th because it's a weekend. I try to keep it on a weekend. So I will be at the property on the 30th, and then going forward, the property is always open. As long as there's not 12 feet of snow.
Which we've had a lot of snow this winter.
Yes, because we do not plow the driveway in the winter. It's just, there's no reason to do it. But the property is always open, and we have the benches out there. You can walk the pathway. It's very peaceful. And that is
like an acre or so, right? What is it? How many?
I think it's just under 2 acres.
Okay, yeah.
It's very beautiful.
It's a kind of a meadowy space, but then it has the structure that's on it that has part of the school, the foundation.
The foundation is inside the enclosure, and that is locked.
And that is inaccessible without Tracy.
So if you're at the property,
and it's in the middle of nowhere. It's in the boonies.
If you're going to visit the property, give me at least 3 days heads up, because I do work full time. And once we go into our summer season here, I am swamped. We're just really, really busy. But if you give me headway, like a week's notice, like, hey, I'm going to be in town. Shoot me a text message, 315-879-8804. If you call me, my phone does not know you, and it will not answer you. It'll go right to voicemail. If you leave me a voicemail, I'll get back to you. But texting is the best way. You can text and say, hi, I'm at the property. Can I get a tour? If I'm not doing anything, I may just pop down and give you a quick tour. 9 times out of 10, I'm swamped, not just with work, but I have grandkids. I have a family. So
she has a life, folks. So
I do.
Let her know months in advance if you can that you're coming. Ideally, right?
The nice thing is the enclosure has these beautiful open windows that you can look in. So, you're really not missing anything if you just show up and you look in. If I let you in, I'm not going to let you touch anything. So, it's just the same. I try to tell people, just look in the window, and it's not the same. Well, yeah, it is, because you can't touch anything. But
you're distant, people.
You can't take a rock home. Take a walnut. But I am happy to, I'm happy to meet people down there. The 30th, I will be, telling the story probably 150 times over and over, which I love to do. I answer questions. If I'm there, I do check in at the property. So if you're looking on my Facebook page and you see I've checked in, I'm there. Show up. I don't mind. I'm available for talks and lectures, and I love to talk about the Fox Sisters. I'm doing a talk this weekend at the Pittsford Community Library, so that'll be interesting, and that's the Fox Sisters story. But yeah, just shoot me a text or email foxsisters1848 at Yahoo or Gmail, excuse me.
Yeah.
Gmail. Shoot me, an email and say, hey, I'm coming in May. Can you meet me there?
And the important thing is you're more likely from May 31st to November 1st is when you are usually there on a weekend.
Yep.
I usually on a Saturday, right?
Saturday, Sunday. Sometimes I'm there Mondays. It just depends on what's going on
the schedule. So we all know how to get a hold of Tracy now. If you want to make a special visit to the Fox sister property. And we really appreciate that you've been doing this for years now and protecting that space and also educating so many people about spiritualist history. We can't thank you enough for all of these years of service, and that you continue to, with such an open heart, really do the work to keep spiritualism history strong. So thank you so much, Tracy.
Oh, thank you.
And for those of you who can take part on March 30th, as Tracy said, there's going to be a special event. She'll be there at the Fox family property, unless it's super snowy, because honestly, by end of April, we have had 1.5 feet of snow sometimes come.
Yeah.
And so just a lot of things are weather dependent in our area, and you just want to make sure that you are prepared. So I want to make sure I bold, italicize, underline that for folks. Yeah. And yes, please join me on March 24th if you're interested in more of spiritualist history. I don't talk about the Fox sisters as much, because I'm trying to hit a whole bunch of other mediums from that Victorian time during that. But if you want to know more about history, and I've got some great handouts ready for you all, then please join me on March 24th, and you can reserve your spot for that right now. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We really appreciate. Please like and share and subscribe so that we can keep wonderful episodes coming to you. My special guest next week will be John Holland, who is a celebrity medium, and he's been on the show before, and just a sweetheart of a guy who will come and talk about the mechanics of bridging two worlds. And I've got other great shows of summer highlights. They're coming to the Lilydale Assembly here this summer. So make sure that you go to the lilydaleassembly.org website if you want to know more about the daily events, the message events, the healing events, the workshops. You can sign up for them right there and join us this summer in person. All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. God bless. Bye-bye.